on a chilly August day in 1936. Just outside Berlin, Germany, a team of American boys prepared to row the biggest race of their lives at the Olympic Games. The competition that would become known as Adolf Hitler's Games was nearly complete. The Nazi leader had regarded the Olympics as a chance to introduce the world to the glory of a new Germany and prove Aryan supremacy through athletic triumph. The host nation had won more medals than any other. And on this afternoon, with Hitler at the racecourse, German rowers earned gold medals in the first 5 races of the day, to the delight of the Führer. Now, in the final race, they were looking to continue their domination.
The Americans walk into this thing thinking they're in a race. But what they actually are part of a global stage.
As tens of thousands of spectators filled the grandstand, and millions back in the United States tuned into their radios, the Americans entered the water. With a key member of their team suffering from a severe lung infection, and the worst lane assignment on the course, putting them directly in the face of an unrelenting wind. Adversity was once again shadowing the 9 boys who'd brought their racing shell across the world from what was still America's frontier.
These guys were nobodies. The odds of these blue-collar boys living in the worst time in American history becoming sports heroes are just astronomical.
On October 9th, 1933, in Seattle, at the old airplane hangar that served as the University of Washington's shell house, several dozen boys showed up for crew practice. The bulk of them would ultimately succumb to rowing's cruel demands, leaving the team behind. A few of them, however, would not.
These kids were very representative of the Pacific Northwest, which was raw, newly shaped. The city of Seattle was only about 80 years old. These boys were the sons of loggers, the sons of fishermen. They did odd jobs for $1 a day. They used their hands as claws and their backs as levers. You know, they were grunts.
This was the middle of the Depression, and these guys were having a hard time putting a couple meals a day in front of themselves.
One member of the Washington crew, well acquainted with that hardship, was a 19-year-old named Joe Rance. Rance had been born, the second of 2 boys, in Spokane, a lumber town across the state from Seattle. When he was 4 years old, he watched his mother die of lung cancer.
He remembered the handkerchief with blood on it when she'd take it away from her mouth. He remembered being at her funeral, but he never really knew his mother.
He was sent east to be with an aunt for a time, and eventually returned to the care of his father, Harry, and stepmother, Thula. Their life together was fraught with financial troubles and emotional tension from the outset.
They found themselves living at this gold and ruby mine out in Idaho. Thula took a dislike to Joe almost immediately. One day, Joe got in a spat with Thula's child. Thula was just outraged and demanded that Joe leave the house. Joe's father took him up to the schoolhouse, and the teacher agreed to let Joe stay there if he would chop wood to keep the stove fed day and night. To feed himself, he had to work at the camp kitchen. So he found himself basically living on his own for the first time when he was just 10 years old.
Joe lived in the schoolhouse for a few months before moving with his family to another town in Washington. There, the Rantz's troubles only deepened, and Joe became a casualty of the desperation.
A day came when Joe came home from school, and he found the family car with the whole family in it and all kinds of luggage in it. And he didn't know what was going on. And his father said, "We can't make it here. We're going to leave, Joe. But the thing is, you're going to have to stay behind. Thula doesn't want you to come with us."
They started to drive out the driveway, and Harry and Mike, the little brothers, were looking out the back window of the car, and he could just hear Harry screaming, "What about Joe? What about Joe?"
It was emblematic of other kids during the Great Depression. You had the economic thing, not knowing where your next meal is going to come from. And then you had the family dysfunction. The only place you can go, the place to call home, that was taken away from Joe Rantz. And it was somewhat typical because people felt like, I just don't have the means to give food to this child. So he comes out of those two completely broken systems, the two foundations of living, basically.
But there was where he really had to make the decision of, am I a victim or am I a survivor? Because he had to pick up his life from there, had to, somehow.
The teenager lived alone for 2 years. He hunted and fished for food and made money by selling stolen liquor and working as a logger. All the while, he remained in school. Then his older brother invited him to come live in Seattle. For the first time, he could live something close to a normal life. He began competing in school sports. One day, he caught the eye of the University of Washington crew coach, Al Ulbrichtson, who was looking for potential rowers to recruit.
Ulbrichtson showed up at Roosevelt High School, and he noticed this big, tall, blonde kid on the gymnastics equipment. Joe had great upper body strength. He'd been cutting hay and digging ditches from the time he was 14 on.
I'm not even sure before that he really had his eye on college. He had somebody that wanted him. I think he saw an open door, and he decided he would go through it.